My name is Lola Belo. I work within the Legal Services Consumer Panel Secretariat. The Legal Services Consumer Panel is a statutory body created by the Legal Services Act 2007, and our role is to represent the interests of consumers. We predominantly focus on the interests of vulnerable consumers and individual consumers. So for over 10 years, we have commissioned and published a tracker survey of legal services consumers. And most of the data that you saw in the video was from that piece of survey. So our tracker survey tells us how consumers shop around for legal services, how consumers choose legal services, how they use legal services, how they pay for legal services, including satisfaction levels. For the last 6-7 years, we've been quite concerned that there's been a disparity amongst different groups of consumers. So consumers from an ethnic minority background seem to be experiencing legal services quite differently than those from a white British background. And this data from our tracker survey this year shows very clearly that white British consumers are more likely to be satisfied with the outcome of their matter as opposed to, or when you compare it to those from an ethnic minority background. And similarly, those from a white British background seem to have higher level, not seem, but definitely have higher level of satisfaction with the service that they received in comparison to those from an ethnic minority background. The consumer panel wanted to really delve into this to understand what was behind some of these findings, and we commissioned qualitative research. Qualitative research is generally smaller, and so we took 13 people through a week-long exercise of asking detailed questions about their experience. These individuals have had to use legal services in the last 2 years, and it had to be in a family or employment matter. We wanted to look at family and employment because we don't think that there's enough that's been done in this area. So the findings. Before I go on to the finding, I think it's really important for me to say the first impression from ethnic minority consumers was that their legal services provider was generally very professional, highly educated, very skilled, and that they got good quality from their legal services providers. But there were 3 recurring themes that kept coming through: communication, improvements in that area, trust, and feeling heard. And I think I've heard 1 or 2 people mention or highlight these areas today. So looking at communication, the responses from our very small sample was very mixed, but it was very, very clear that where communication wasn't good, it added to the stress that the consumer felt. And of course, we looked at family, we looked at employment, areas of, you would probably argue, high stress areas naturally, but probably emphasizing the need to be a little bit more thoughtful around communication. Where communication was good, the consumers told us that their legal services providers were very responsive, were proactive, were professional. We even had really great examples where a gentleman was telling us that, not only did he get prompt responses to his email, it was followed through with phone calls, and that when the solicitor in particular wasn't around, there was always somebody else that was on top of their case. So these were really positive examples of good communication. Our ethnic minority sample came up with some recommendations around how communication could be improved further, and some of that has already been alluded to this morning. Speak in simple, plain language. Communicate simply so that people can understand you better. Be proactive and demonstrate a genuine interest in listening to and understanding the needs of consumers, ethnic minority consumers specifically. The second theme was around trust. You saw from the tracker survey findings that there is a disparity between how ethnic minority consumers trust and how those from a white British background trust. So our question is, do you trust your legal services provider to tell you the truth? 61% of ethnic minority consumers said that they did, and 71% of those from a white British background said that they did. So there is a difference there. The recommendation around this area, and it's been really good actually to see some work already being done by regulators, is to reach out into communities to build connections and to build trust. But that means that regulators and perhaps providers need to be proactive in this area. And I say that not just for ensuring that ethnic minority consumers have a positive experience of legal services, but we know also from our tracker survey that Black Africans, ethnic minorities in general, but especially Black African consumers are less likely to have a will. So there are business opportunities, but the connections, and that may be for obviously very different and complex and complicated reasons, but there is also potentially avenues to build business if trust and a better connection is built. The final theme that came out really strongly in our qualitative work was around feeling heard and listened to and understood. And I think that perhaps as a Black female myself, this is one that I can relate to. If you look through the report, you would read through a lovely lady's experience, and she had a family law matter. She was talking about the case and the issue, and she kept highlighting the things that were really important to her. And those were things around religion, culture, and she didn't feel that her legal services provider was necessarily hearing those things. I know that some people probably considered listening and being heard to be soft skills, but they are really, really important when you're dealing with a client, and perhaps more important when you're dealing with people that come from a different background and a culture, have different cultural heritage. A gentleman in our qualitative survey talked about his own legal team really emphasizing and asking him questions around, the use of certain terminologies, if they were going to be offensive. And even though he kept telling them and reassuring them that the terminologies weren't offensive, he felt really good that they had acknowledged his difference, his cultural background. So feeling heard and feeling listened to sometimes requires legal services providers to actually acknowledge difference. The recommendation here is for providers to show greater empathy, understanding, and maybe employ different techniques. There are techniques that we know have been adopted by people that are professional coaches, playing back what you've heard to your client, asking your client and not just assuming, but asking them what is really important about their legal matter. We know that more needs to be done in this area. Our qualitative research is a very, very small sample. I think our challenge to everyone is to note and understand that there is a disparity, to take our work forward by commissioning more research. And the final point here is, how can we serve these consumers better? I think what I want to leave you with is this, that serving ethnic minority consumers better will mean that you are serving all consumers better. And also that if we can get it right here in the UK, we are more likely to be able to compete globally when we go outside and work with people that are not like us. Thank you.